Hi, I'm Sam Edith.
And I'm Amy Nelson. Welcome to What's Her Story with Sam and Amy.
This is a show about the world's most remarkable women, their professional and personal journeys.
Together, we'll hear from gold medalists, best-selling authors, and leaders of the world's most iconic brands.
Listen every Thursday or join the conversation anytime on Instagram at What's Her Story Podcast. I think for most people who think of spending a semester abroad, right? You had really fought your family for the opportunity to go abroad, and it was going to be financially difficult, and it was going to be a huge departure from your life as a University of Washington student, but they really embraced your adventure. And I think maybe if you could share with us what your experience was in terms of when you got to Italy and what you were expecting.
Yeah, sure. So one thing is that I grew up in a multicultural household, in the sense that my mom was born in Germany. My oma, is my oma. She's like, I'm not, I technically am a born and raised American, but I grew up eating, goulash and rouladen and Zwetschgenknödel. And so I had an appreciation for the fact that there are other places and other kinds of people and other ways of living and other foods and other languages out there in the world. I never had this sense of the entire world eats hamburgers and speaks English. So I understood and appreciated that the world was way bigger than what I had access to necessarily in my own small ecosystem that I grew up in. And my family also really supported me exploring both my heritage, but also just the curiosity of other peoples and other languages and other places. And so when I decided that I wanted to study abroad, they were really happy for me. They were also concerned because I had grown up in an environment where my entire extended family was right next to me within walking distance, and that I had not really ever had experience living alone before. This was, even when my parents had talked before of me studying abroad, the idea was that I would go stay with my aunt in Germany, and then I would go to school. We had been talking about me going and potentially spending a year of high school in Germany and living with my aunt. So it wasn't so much the other place that was the scary part. It was Amanda's a 20-year-old sheltered kid, and she's going to go live by herself for the first time. And of course, they tried to set me up and had conversations with me about, okay, you know what to do when you get sick, right? Can you go to the hospital? Do you know how to access your health insurance? Do you even know that you have health insurance? Because I've never had to ask you to deal with that before. So these are the kinds of conversations that we were having. And I did have a little bit of that, not just culture shock of arriving in a culture that I was not as familiar with, but also the shock of being alone and on my own and taking care of myself for the first time. I had this feeling of I have to be the adult and take care of myself and be a go-getter and so the first thing I did was very studiously went right to school, signed up for my classes, got my visa. I did the checklist. I even got a little side job so that I would have spending money, and got myself an apartment. It was all happening, and I felt very, very large and in charge, I was a responsible person, and my parents' worrying was clearly not an issue. And I made friends, and then I saw that the college world has its ups and downs. There's some good parts and some bad parts, as we all know. And you don't have to be abroad in order to encounter those kinds of things. Kids have bad experiences in college when they go to frat parties and stuff like that. There are moments where we get vulnerable, where people are testing boundaries, and where sometimes boundaries are crossed in ways that are uncomfortable. I certainly had a few experiences like that when I was over in Perugia. At one point, someone offered to give me a ride home on his Vespa because I had like stayed late at the bar that I was working at and didn't want to walk home in the dark. And the guy said, "Oh yeah, sure. I'm a friend of, these British girls, and like I'll just give you a ride home. No worries." So I plunk down on his Vespa, and then he proceeds to drive me not to my house, but to his, and refuses to take me back to my house, even though I don't know where I am, and I have to like yell at him basically to take me home. So I had like things like that happen while I was there that certainly gave me pause, but nothing that like, was out of the norms of possibility.
Well, also those are the kinds of things that a lot of college students experience when they first arrive at college, and this was really your first experience away from home. So even though it was your junior year abroad, it was the first time you were experiencing these things, and that could have happened anywhere. Could we talk for a moment about your apartment? Because I thought that the way you describe your sister Deanna and you going ahead and finding your apartment and then visiting your aunt, and it seemed like when you were going to arrive there, everything would be set. And even the way you described your apartment was so idyllic. Can you share a little bit about the situation you had set up for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it was idyllic, and it did feel like everything was falling into place in a really perfect way because, like, the first time I went and visited the school that I was going to be studying at, right outside was a young woman who was putting up her phone number for a room for let. And I immediately just talked to her straight away, and she said, "Oh yeah, the room's like right over here. We're just a few steps away from the university. It's in this like beautiful little cottage that's overlooking the valley, and you can see we have fig trees in the garden." And I was like, "Good. Okay, like that's amazing." Sure. And like we had coffee and hit it off, and immediately right then and there made an agreement for me to stay. So as soon as I told them that I was going to go back, stay a few more weeks with my aunt, and then come back to Perugia when the semester started. And they said, "Great, sounds good. We'll see you then." And while I was away with my aunt, after I had made an agreement with them, that's when they met Meredith, and she took the other bedroom, the one that was slightly larger and overlooking the valley. And it really was this ideal situation because not only was I close to the university, not only was I in this beautiful house, but I was also surrounded by people who were just the right kinds of people for me to be around. Like there was another foreign exchange student, but also there were these two Italian women who were young women who could, give us the lay of the land a little bit. And like, I remember talking to Philomena about like, should I buy Italian shoes? And she was like, heck yeah, go to this place. And so I went and bought some Italian boots because she recommended, like, there are these, it was truly an ideal situation. And I felt very lucky. So.
But then 6 weeks later, the unthinkable happened.
Yes. Then the big but. 6 weeks after I arrived and moved in and everything was going great, me and the roommates made friends with the guys who lived in the apartment downstairs from us in the cottage. We went out dancing. We had dinners. Meredith and I went grocery shopping together. All of that was plugging along wonderfully. And then Halloween rolled around, and I was hanging out with Raffaele Solecito, a guy that I had met 4 days before. And Meredith had gone out with her British friends to go out dancing. The next day, November 1st, I was hanging out with Meredith in our sort of like kitchenette main shared area. She was telling me about how she was going to go watch a movie with her friends and hang out. And I made plans to go with Raffaele to visit a local town that was nearby. And I left and spent the night with Raffaele. The next day, I come home and find that my house is a crime scene because a local burglar broke into our home, and slowly over the course of the day, I realized that not only has our house been broken into, but Meredith has been murdered. And that is, it was the most surreal experience, because the last thing that I thought would happen to me or anyone around me was that someone would get hurt, that someone would be brutally raped and murdered. I came home that morning thinking I was going to take a shower and change my clothes and go out with my new boyfriend. And instead I came home and found things amiss in my house that I didn't really know how to explain. My front door was wide open. There was some speckles of blood in the bathroom. There was feces left in the toilet of the other bathroom. And I brought Raffaele over to help me sort of understand what was going on. I was calling my roommates, trying to figure out what was going on. Two of them weren't answering their phones, Meredith and Laura. Filomena did answer her phone. She said that I should call the police. We found a broken window. We found that Filomena's room had been ransacked. And we found that Meredith's door was locked. And when the police arrived, the police kicked in the door of Meredith's room and found her body. And a sort of really important big thing that happened in that moment was by that point, when the police arrived at the house, there were two of us roommates there, Filomena and me. Laura was in Rome and she was on her way back. And Meredith had not been accounted for. She wasn't answering her phones. In fact, the police arrived and said that they had found her phones in a garden. And Filomena was there next to Meredith's door when the police kicked in her door. And she saw into Meredith's room. She saw all the blood. She saw Meredith's body. It was partially covered by a blanket, but her foot was sticking out, and it was very clear that something horrendous had happened. And Filomena freaked out. She started screaming. She started crying. She was out of her mind and hysterical. And everyone started yelling in rapid Italian, and all of us were pushed out of the house. I had not seen into Meredith's bedroom, and I didn't fully know what was going on. And so, people look back and, look back at those images of me outside of the house as it's being, shut off as a crime scene, and all these police are coming and going, and Filomena is off to the side getting hugged by her boyfriend, and she's crying and hysterical. And meanwhile, I'm off to another side being hugged by Raffaele, not crying and not hysterical. And that was in large part because I wasn't yet sure of what was going on, and I had not seen with my own eyes the horror of what happened. And to make a long story short, there was a 3-second clip that the local news reporters who descended upon, our little drive-in, they took a video of Raffaele hugging me and giving me a kiss. He was trying to comfort me. I was cold. I was confused. I was scared. He gave me a kiss. And that moment of my life has been replayed over and over and over again, zoomed in, slow motion, examined, talked about for years, and has been used to blame me for my own wrongful conviction. People saying to me, it's your fault that everyone suspected you because look at what you're doing. You are clearly not upset that Meredith has been murdered. And it's, it's taken me a long time to unpack and dismantle the kind of self-blame that I've felt for a long time. When the world blames you for the bad things that happen to you, and you're treated like a crazy person, you start to internalize that. And it's taken me a long time to step back and say, actually, I didn't do anything wrong. And I never should have been suspected because my boyfriend gave me a hug and gave me a kiss. Like, yeah.
When all of this first happened, your instinct was to help the police find Meredith's killer.
Yeah. Yeah. So those first, like, immediately as soon as I realized that something bad had happened, and I asked Raffaele to call the police for me because I didn't even know how to call the police in Italy. It's not 911. My 100% goal was to cooperate and figure out what happened. And then when I discovered that Meredith had been murdered and that there was a killer on the loose, like, I wasn't sure if this was a serial killer potentially who was targeting our house and everyone in our house. And so here I was feeling like I have no idea who this person is or why they did what they did. All I know is they did something horrible, and now they're walking around. And the police are telling me that there might be anything that I remember, anything possible that I could remember that could lead them to the killer is necessary for me to do. So I had to basically spent hours and hours and hours with them in the police office, trying to remember any small detail, any like off color comment or any weird glance that someone gave towards Meredith, or like any person that I thought could be suspicious. I shared with them everything that I possibly could know. I gave them every phone number I had. I tried to describe every person I had ever seen talk to Meredith or come close to our home. I tried to think of anything. And the scary part was, like, at that time, I had no idea who could have done this. Like, yes, there were some of those, like, weird moments, like that guy who brought me on his Vespa to his house. I brought him up to the police, and I was like, here, there's a guy, I don't really know what his name is, but, like, he brought me on his Vespa, and, like, maybe he had something to do with it. He knew where my house was. Like, I was thinking of anything, but I could not imagine who would want to hurt Meredith. Like, it was beyond me, because Meredith was a really sweet person. She had lots of friends. Like, it just didn't make any sense, which made it even scarier. But here I was thinking, the police are telling me anything you can remember because you're Meredith's roommate and because you're Meredith's friend and because you came home and discovered the crime scene, you are our most important witness. You are the most important person to this investigation. We need you. So I submitted myself to hours and hours of questioning. When they asked me to come back to the apartment and look through our kitchen drawers to, like, see if there were any knives missing, I did that. I did everything that they possibly asked me to do, even when it felt like I was being pushed in an unfair way. Like, I was being asked the same questions over and over and over again, and it was not, I was often doing it with people who didn't really speak English very well, and I didn't speak Italian very well, so a lot of time I felt like there were misunderstandings happening. And meanwhile, I had no idea that my phones had been tapped and that the police were listening to every conversation I had with my mother. And they knew that my mother was planning on arriving in Italy to help me find a place to stay. And the day before that she was due to arrive, they called me in for an overnight questioning, they called it. It was an overnight interrogation where they proceeded to lie to me, to slap me, to keep me awake through the night until I broke and I was willing to sign statements implicating myself and others in the crime.
Well, your previous boss, Patrick, the situation with you kind of being forced to point your finger at anyone at that point. You'd been basically beaten by the police, both mentally and physically. They kept you up all night. They created a situation where you were literally mentally ill, I mean, with insomnia and pain. And they found this text on your phone that had said, from Patrick, saying you did not need to go to work that day. And you said, see you later. Great. Have a good evening, which is a very American term for see ya, bye. And they interpreted it as you are going to see Patrick that night.
Yeah. And what's interesting is like they didn't know who Patrick was. They just knew that there was a person on my phone who was named Patrick, who they didn't even have his text message from me because I think my phone automatically deleted it. But they had my response to him, which was to say, "Oh, have a good night. See you later." And they interpreted that to mean I was making an appointment with Patrick the night of the murder. And when I didn't tell them that I had met with Patrick the night of the murder, in fact, I said I did not meet with anyone the night of the murder, they said, "You are either lying or you have amnesia. You don't remember that you met with this person because it was so traumatizing. You must have witnessed him murdering Meredith, and it was so traumatizing that you can't remember. So remember the truth." And they would not accept that what I was telling them was true. They said that I was making it up because I didn't remember the truth, and that until and unless I did remember the truth, I would never see my family again.
You've written, and I also know this, I'm a lawyer in my background, and I think very few people understand how many people who are innocent confess to a crime.
Yeah.
It's a really high statistic. Yeah. It's like 25%.
Oh, yeah.
What can you say about that? I mean, I think you shared part of it, like just even the emotion in your voice in that moment. And I can't even imagine going back in that moment in your mind. And what you were a kid. Yeah. In a country where
it was hard.
Yeah, it's got to be like, I'm going to cry. Like, I can't imagine. And, what can we tell people about this? Because I think even in this country with a very different criminal justice system, we have a very concrete view of things, right?
Innocent people don't confess, and that if you implicate yourself, it's because you're guilty, and no one could ever be made to say things that aren't true, and and police interrogations are not inherently coercive. Like the amount of times that I've been told, like, what happened in that interrogation room is your fault. It's because you're a racist or you're a liar. And instead of thinking like, in that situation, I had no control over what was happening, and it was the most terrifying experience of my life. And you're right. There are so many proven. So the cases, like when we talk about innocent people confessing to crimes that they didn't commit, and how there's this great statistic out there that says that 1 in 4 wrongful convictions involved a false confession or a false admission by the person who was wrongly convicted. What that means is that in cases where they have proven through DNA evidence that the person who was convicted was actually innocent, in 1 in 4 of those cases, that person also falsely confessed. What that doesn't even bring into the calculation is the number of cases where there is no DNA evidence. And you can't definitively say, oh, it's, the DNA belonged to this other person. Like in my case, the Innocence Project would say, yes, there's DNA in your case, but there's also all these other issues and blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't even think that they would count my false confession in that statistic, because in those cases, very often they're cases in the wrongful conviction world that involve men who are accused of crimes, because men who are accused are often accused of like an actual crime occurred, and the police went after the wrong person, and then years later they re-examine the DNA and realize, oh, that DNA doesn't belong to the person who was implicated, it's somebody else. That's what happens in a lot of men's cases. In most women's cases, that's not how women are convicted. Most women are convicted of things that were not crimes in the first place. So a great example of this is their children die. They fall off out of a tree, or they have some disease that no one was aware of. The kid dies, and that accidental or natural death is said to be a criminal act. that the mother murdered her children. And it's not a case where women can be determined to be definitively innocent through DNA evidence. Instead, what you have to do is prove that it wasn't a crime.
Right.
And I'm not even sure, and like in a lot of those cases, because women have been so traumatized already by the death of their child, they are very, very suggestible and susceptible to false confession. And it's really tragic. So the amount of things that I've learned about the police interrogation room, it's like one of my biggest issues with the criminal justice system is like that private space where the police have all of the control and they can lie to you and manipulate you, and how innocent people are particularly susceptible to being manipulated in that space because they're told, well, you're helping us, aren't you? You don't want a lawyer because that just makes things difficult for you. And, you know, there are lots of reasons why innocent people falsely confess. Like one of them is they just think they're being railroaded and that no one will believe them that they're innocent. And so they just say, okay, if I say that I'm guilty, maybe I'll get a lesser sentence. And it's just a logical calculation. Like they see that they're being wrongly convicted. They see that they're being suspected, that no one believes them. And they think, if I go in front of a judge and a jury, no one's going to believe me. So I'm just going to say that I did it and hopefully get some mercy. Other people confess wrongfully because they're trying to save someone. They are trying to protect someone. And then there are those of us, like myself, who falsely confess because we were coerced, because the police either made us believe that we were involved in the crime by telling us that we have amnesia, that we blacked out, and then implant a kind of false memory. They suggest to us what might have happened. And then we say, okay, yeah, sure, that's what happened. I think I'm remembering that now. Like that is the other side of it. And that is the most dangerous one, because if you make someone feel crazy and you make someone believe, even just for a brief moment, that they might, like, basically that what you are saying is true and not what they know to be true, people don't know how to interpret that in a courtroom. A jury doesn't know what it feels like to be made to feel crazy and to say things that you don't really believe and don't really remember. And it is devastating to wrongfully convicted people when they take it to the courtroom. And it was devastating in my own case.
At what point?
Because honestly,
At what point did you realize you were going to jail for a crime you didn't commit?
I had already been in jail for a few days. So even after they put handcuffs on me, even after they had stripped me naked and photographed my entire body and brought me to a prison cell, the entire time they never told me that I was suspected of being involved in Meredith's murder. They always told me that I was a witness and that they were taking me somewhere for my own protection and that I would see my mom momentarily. So I spent a few days in prison before I was brought in front of a judge for the first time, and it was that judge who finally told me, you are suspected of murdering Meredith Kercher. How do you plea? And that was the first time I ever met my lawyers. I still hadn't seen my mom. It sounds stupid, but like I literally jaw dropped because like that was not what the police had told me. That was not what I understood to be happening. I was shocked, but I was also trapped. And I no longer had a voice. I kind of never had a voice and a say over what was happening to me, but that's when I really, really understood, like, the police were never believed me, and I was brought through something. I was coerced, and now here I am, and I don't understand why.
You spent the next 4 years in prison for a crime you didn't commit. How did you get through those 4 years?
Um, it's always difficult for an innocent person. It was really interesting because it's not like we didn't know what happened to Meredith. Like, this was one of those weird wrongful conviction cases where the person who actually raped and murdered her was discovered. And there was plenty of evidence against him from very early on, not immediately, not before I was arrested, but within weeks after I was arrested. The blood, there was DNA and there were fingerprints and there were footprints, and all of them traced back to this local burglar named Rudy Gaudet, who had a history of breaking and entering into people's homes. And he had fled the country. When they recaptured him, he had wounds on his hands from being cut from the struggle. Like, there was his DNA inside Meredith's body, inside of her purse where her money had been stolen. Like, there was all of this. It was his feces that was found in the toilet. Like, his DNA and evidence against him was everywhere.
Yeah.
And so that was within weeks of me being arrested. And so I spent the first 2 years of my imprisonment leading up to the final verdict in my case thinking, this has all been a big misunderstanding. Like, we know what happened. We know who did this. It's not like, there's confusion. Like, there's no DNA evidence placing me in the scene of the crime. Like, it's obvious what happened. Like, I don't understand why the prosecution is pursuing a case against me when there's no evidence, but clearly they arrested me, so they're pursuing this case and they feel like they have to. Maybe, like, who knows? It was surreal to me that the prosecution decided to continue with this case regardless of what the evidence said. But a deep, deep part of me was not just hopeful but certain that the rest of the world saw through this, that ultimately the truth would win out, and that common sense would lead to a just outcome in this case. And it was only after 2 years of my imprisonment when I received a guilty verdict and I was sentenced to more time in prison than the person who raped and murdered Meredith, that the entire, like, I had this insane existential crisis of, oh my God, the truth doesn't matter. No one cares what the truth is. And so this life that I have been living, that I feel like it was this sort of limbo space where I'm waiting to get to relive my life again, that's not what this is. This is my life now. Like, I am, my identity and my life is the world thinks I'm a monster and treats me like a monster and locks me away as a monster. And that's my life. And I'm 22. And so I had to start thinking, how do I live that life? How do I make that life worth living? And a lot of that just meant looking around me, looking at this very sad space around me, this very limited space around me, full of broken and hurt individuals who had hurt other people, and thinking like, okay, this is my community now. What is my role in this community? What can I offer this community? And so I figured that out. I realized that I was one of the only people in that who was a prisoner who could read and write. I was one of the people who was fluent by that point in Italian and English, and so I could serve as a translator. I spent a lot of time reading and writing letters to family and trying to feel like that was enough.
I think a lot of people would give up. What do you think, if you can look back and you can identify it, like, what do you think it was within you that allowed you to even ask that question? Like, how do I build a life here in this place?
I don't know if this is like a happy way to think about it, but like, I always knew that I could give up, right? Like, nothing was stopping me from giving up. And if I really, really wanted to, I probably could have figured out a way to kill myself. And that was weirdly a comforting thought to me, because one of the most difficult parts of it was feeling trapped. Like, I was not just trapped in a prison cell and not just trapped by these circumstances, but I felt trapped in my own life. I feel like I didn't have control over who I was to the world anymore. And so, like, feeling trapped was one of the worst feelings about it. And so I allowed myself to acknowledge that in a fundamental way, in a very physical way, I'm not necessarily trapped. I can always choose, I can always escape in this one way. The other way was to realize that there were, like, I was very, very aware, acutely aware of what had been taken from me. And that made me acutely aware of what hadn't been taken from me. And the thing that hadn't been taken from me was my own mind. I was the one who still maintained 100% control over how to process what was happening to me. So yes, I could not control where my body was or what was happening to my body. I couldn't control who was around me. I couldn't control what I was eating, what I was drinking, everything about my life I couldn't control, but I could control what I did about that. And that sort of forced me into this almost Buddhist space of just embracing that sense of control and taking responsibility for it too. Because I knew that because I still had control over it, what I did with what I still had control over was the one thing that defined who I was. And I did not want to be someone who indulged in fantasies of revenge or in bitterness and anger. I wanted to be someone who survived, who made the best of a bad situation. And a huge part of that was because I was never satisfied by the idea that the reason why this was happening to me is because there are good people in the world and there are bad people in the world, and bad people do bad things to good people. That never rang true to me, because I just intuitively knew that no one in the prosecutor's office was sitting there in their office cackling evilly about how they were going to put an innocent girl in prison. That was not what was happening. So instead, I wanted to understand how people could be doing this to me and thinking they were doing the right thing. And that question has been something that I have pondered for over a decade. And it is alongside the question of how do you regain agency over your own life when it is drastically limited, and how do you reclaim your identity after it has been so completely stolen.
One of your fellow prisoners who you were close with called your optimism kind of like a Disney-like optimism with how you see the world.
Yeah.
Have you maintained that since getting out of that situation?
I do get accused of being very Disney princess-like, and for funny little things too, when you're walking along, walking outside, and someone is walking their dog, or there's a cat in a yard, and sometimes the dog or the cat will just run away when they see you. Animals don't run away when they see me; they always come to me. So in a weird, Snow White effect kind of thing. I don't know what to attribute that to, but it's, I have a weird, animal cuddle superpower for some reason. But yeah, I think that I don't know if I would call it optimism, because in some ways my mom has like grieved the loss of a very optimistic side of me, where I like the part of me that's like, everything's gonna be okay because the world's great and everyone's awesome. Like that part of me that was a huge part of me as a child and as a young adult before all of this happened. That is not quite me today. Like I regularly experience sadness in a way that I I didn't before. And like grief is not just a thing that happens to you, but it's an ongoing companion that you carry with you always. But that isn't to say that I don't think that there is a way to live, not just, survive, but to like live well with grief and to be a better person because of grief. I do think that is not just possible, but like an opportunity that I always want to grasp.
Given how different the court of public opinion judged you from what the truth was, how do you now reconcile, do you care more about what people think of you or less?
So I care and I don't care depending on the circumstance. So on the one hand, I know, and I think in a big way, I just sort of know that when people are judging other people, oftentimes what they are doing is they are projecting their own feelings of either guilt or anger or hurt onto the individual, instead of like, really deeply understanding the individual. So if that makes sense, like I often feel like the person that people hated and that people wanted to put away in prison was not me. It was an idea of a person that just happened to have my face and my name. And so when I continue to this day to receive messages that convey not just, general dislike, but like actual hatred, it's a stunning reminder for me that so often what people think of me has nothing to do with me and has everything to do with what's going on with them, and that I just happen to be a convenient sort of thing that they can project whatever is happening inside of them onto. And so that is a good reminder for me, even when it happens in like, other circumstances that say like there's a misunderstanding between me and my sister. I'm very much reminded like, oh yeah, she may be upset and it might have nothing to do with me. It might have something to do with something that's going on with her, and that gives me a better perspective of how to deal with the situation. But it does matter, like it matters to me in the sense that in a lot of ways, what kind of person people think of me as, and what, especially when it comes to what I am limited to. A lot of people think that I exist solely in the box that they first heard me in association with a murder that I didn't do. And so if they ever hear of me existing outside of that story and outside of that space, people get frustrated at me. Like they're like, stop existing outside of this box that I have you nicely labeled in my mind. Like you don't get to go on and be a mom and get married because I forever associate you with the death of another young girl. So I'm always forever going to compare you to that dead young girl. And everything you do as a person who is not dead is an insult to her memory. And that is the kind of thing that I face, where it almost seems like my very existence in some people's minds is an insult. The fact that I'm not dead is an insult. And that is a great limitation, because it means that, as I walk through the world as a non-anonymous person, I can't do what normal people do. I can't go on Tinder. I can't get a regular job. I can't, do all of those things. And it's extremely isolating. And so I've been extremely fortunate to meet someone who is now the father of my child and create a life for myself despite those limitations.
How did you meet?
We have a great meet cute story. He's a local author. He's my husband went to graduate school twice for poetry. Because once is not enough. And then while I was in prison, he was wandering around the country as an itinerant poet. So that's his history. I had no idea who he was when I first met him. In fact, I never even intended to meet him because at the time I was, at the time that he was writing his book, I was living basically in hiding, and I was only associating with my family and the friends who I had met before prison, and like maybe one or two other people who I met in school who I connected with in like poetry class. And so I was living a very quiet life. I was working for a local newspaper, writing arts correspondence, so going and writing reviews of plays and books by local authors, and I was given an advanced copy of his first novel. And I was asked to review it. So I did, and it's called War of the Encyclopedists. It was so funny and smart and tragic and awesome, and I wrote a great review. And then I submitted it, and that was going to be the end of it, except like the very next day I found out that he was doing a book reading in the local bookstore right near my apartment. And I thought, maybe this is the first time that I can go and meet someone who I've never met before and check out this, this situation. And I went and I saw him give this book reading, and I asked him for an interview, and we had a really fun time. We talked about Star Trek and drank scotch and just sort of hit it off. And at the end of that, he shook my hand and was like, we should be friends. And, it was not a big deal for him. He didn't follow my case. He was, not a true crime guy. He kind of sort of knew that people knew about me, but like didn't really care. He wasn't, thinking like, oh, I gotta be friends with this person. He was just like, hey, we should be friends, but if we're not, whatever. Like, that was fun. And for me, it was a really big deal because this was maybe a month or two after I had been fully exonerated.
Oh, wow.
And it was the first time that I was like, wow, maybe I can like meet people and make friends in the real world like a normal person. Mm-hmm. And I did, and we became friends, and then about like 9 months later we started dating, and now we're I think we started dating in 2016, so I guess it's been 5 years, and now we have a 5-month-old baby.
Wow. Can you live a life where you go to the pumpkin patch with your daughter and go to the mall or go to public places and exist as Amanda Knox, the mother, the wife, the family person who's a writer? I mean, what is that like for you?
I mean, I keep trying, right? Like despite the fact that I've definitely encountered problems before, like, when I got married, it became a tabloid story. And when I had a kid and, it became a tabloid story. So I definitely am still considered a tabloid story in a lot of people's minds, and my ongoing sort of private life is still considered content for people, even though it's not in the public interest, and I don't feel like it is. I feel like my private life is often exploited by tabloids to this day. That doesn't stop me from living my life, and I feel like that's been sort of crucial to me being able to reintegrate well into society and to build a life for myself, because I've always pushed back against what people have said I'm not allowed to do. Like, I'm not allowed to meet people. I'm not allowed to go out. I'm supposed to sort of live in the shadow of this horrible experience that happened to me, and that's it. That's my life. And I've always said, like, it's not my life, and that's not who I am. Like, I'm not who I am has nothing to do with the fact that I was wrongly accused of murder. In fact, it has everything to do with the people who accused me of murder, and it has nothing to do with me. and who I am is what I do now. So I'm going to do the best I can with the circumstances that were given me, and I'm going to let that be the thing that defines me. And yeah.
And in talking about what you are now in your career, you're a storyteller, you're a writer, you're a podcaster. How did you envision building a career when you came home? Like, how do you even begin to think about doing that? Because like you said, it's not like you can go like interview for a job.
No, and indeed, like even the idea of like, how did you envision that? Like, I haven't really been able to envision anything. I've more been sort of being present and aware of what sort of presents itself to me, and I try to create the best opportunities out of those circumstances as I can in the moment. But even for me, like, and I think a lot of millennials and younger people feel this, is they often feel like they have to adapt to an ever-changing environment, and that the world is a lot more difficult than it used to be in terms of like how to, build a career. And that's especially difficult for me because in a lot of ways I don't want to be, for instance, tied down to a public space where I can reliably be found because I receive death threats. So I don't want somebody to find out where I work and then find out where I live and all of that. Right. So instead, embracing opportunities that allowed me to have the, not just, freedom to work from home, but the opportunity to feel safe because I work from home. And oftentimes those opportunities have presented themselves because someone was kind enough to offer me the opportunity to prove my worth. And it started with being offered the opportunity to write for a local newspaper. And that turned into writing some articles for a women's magazine for Vice called Broadly. And that turned into doing a show for Facebook called The Scarlet Letter Reports, where I interviewed women who had been publicly vilified. And that turned into me doing a podcast called The Truth About True Crime, where I examined the way that criminal justice has been portrayed and stories about crime have been portrayed in the media, and centralizing the stories of the voices of the people who find themselves at the center of those stories. What do they think about the way that they have been portrayed? And that turned into my latest venture, which is the podcast Labyrinths, that I write, produce, do everything with my husband, Christopher. And that's been really fun because I love working with my husband. I love talking to people about when they have felt lost and how they have found their way through overwhelming experiences. I've had the opportunity to talk to some really cool people, including people who I think are just awesome, like Brent Spiner, Data. Come on, like that's amazing. We came full circle. We talked about Star Trek when my husband and I first met, and now we're working our way through the cast of TNG.
How do you deal with personal safety? I think that's one of the things anyone who's experienced what you have. How do you get back to a place of normalcy and not letting it overcome all of your decisions?
Yeah, and not letting it become something that you crazily obsess over and are paranoid about. Like that's the interesting thing is it's only crazy and paranoid if you haven't received death threats or if you've never had someone break into your home and murder your roommate. Like
exactly. You have all the reasons to be afraid. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I don't invite people to my home unless I trust them. That's a big thing. And it has occasionally occurred where somebody has found out where I live and showed up. And I do not react well to that. Even if they're a journalist who says that they're supportive and they just want to talk, it's like, do not show up at my house unannounced. That's not cool with me. I don't have many spaces in the world where I'm just allowed to be a private person, and my home is like the one place. So just don't violate that. All the same, I'm not living in, the backwoods in Montana where down a really, really long dirt road, and it's not like I don't have relationships with my neighbors, because I do. I'm trying to live as normal a life as possible while also allowing the gift of fear to inform my decisions about when and how I invite people into my personal space.
Your family and friends seemed so incredible and extraordinary through your entire ordeal. I mean, even your friend Madison moved to Italy just to see you 1 hour every week or two. I mean, the resilience of those relationships you had was so extraordinary. And one thing that struck me was how you kept them to, I guess it was like 6 people who, you know, beyond your extended family, who you really relied on. What role did they play? And then what kind of relationships do you have with those people today?
Yeah, I mean, so my family has always been very close. I've also tended to cultivate few but close friendships with people, and that translated into, you know, people who were just there with me through thick and thin. And it was one of the reasons why I think that I have been able to reintegrate back into society better than a lot of people who come out of prison, because I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel like in being wrongly convicted, I suddenly lost my belonging to the sort of I didn't lose membership to humanity. These were people who knew me, who cared about me, who knew that I belonged with them, and I was part of their community, even if I had been removed. And so I was able to come back and rejoin that community. All the same, like, I didn't come back the same person, and I didn't come back to a world that treated me the same way. And so in a lot of ways, my relationship with my family and friends have evolved too since then, because we, in a way, had to relearn and rediscover each other after I came home, because we had all been changed, not just me. Like, everyone in my family, my friends, had all been traumatized by what happened, and we all have reacted to that trauma in different ways. So, like, it's interesting to see how, since it's not just me, but my sisters and my friends who grew up in this overwhelmingly traumatic experience, how we have all reacted to it in different ways.
Your family had to mortgage their homes to defend you, to travel to Italy. What role has money played in your life?
Well, growing up, I never had to worry about it. Not because my family was spectacularly wealthy, but because we were, you know, my dad had a job as an accountant at the Bon Marché, and my mom was a school teacher, and we always had food on the table. And when my mom was too busy or too tired to make dinner, we would walk over to my Oma's house and she would make dinner. So I had never in my life had felt like money was this incredible burden or struggle. I still had to earn it. Like, before going to Perugia, I had 3 jobs that I was working in order to save money in order to spend a year abroad. But that didn't feel like that was, again, like an incredible burden. It just seemed like that was just what you did. And then I came home and I was over $1 million in debt. In debt to my family, in debt to my attorneys. I was in ongoing debt because the trial was not over. And I very gratefully was able to sell a memoir, and with that money, pay back my parents, pay back my attorneys, pay back the publicist who had assisted my family over the course of the years. And I was able to go back to school. And so it's interesting. There was this weird period of my life where I had so many zeros to account for, and now I'm living a regular middle income person's life. I have a Patreon for my podcast. Like, you know, that it's like, it's real.
So are you still in debt, or have you climbed your way out of that?
I've definitely climbed out of out of legal debt,
great.
for sure. And I was able to pay for school. So that was the big thing. I was able to, like, get back to ground zero.
Awesome.
You speaking of, coming home and being in all this legal debt and continuing to fight and all the things you had to deal with, you, in addition to being a storyteller, also work on criminal justice reform.
And part of that is through storytelling, because I think that one of the things that's a really big obstacle for people who are not personally impacted by the criminal justice system is feeling like they can't relate to it. Like, oh, I grew up in an environment where I just sort of assumed that bad people go to prison and good people never have to worry about it. And it's much more complicated than that. Even if, like, the criminal justice system only ever interacted with people who had in fact committed crimes, which it doesn't, it also is the way that we deal with people who have harmed others is, I have witnessed firsthand, imperfect and has led to more harm in the long run, because we are not doing things to, first of all, recidivate people to rehabilitate people who have committed harm, to address the fact that a lot of people who commit crimes and harm others have been harmed prior to having committed crimes. We do very little in the criminal justice system to address the needs of victims of crime. We often put them on the spot and don't offer them resources and support, and put them in a position of feeling like they're at the service of the criminal justice system, and the criminal justice system isn't at their service. So in a lot of ways, we rely on punishing the person who committed the harm instead of rehabilitating the person who has been harmed. Like, all of these different ways that our criminal justice system is this hammer that treats everything like a nail and is committing harms in the process, is something that is a complicated thing that I can only convey through through human storytelling. And so talking about the people that I met in prison and talking about the experience of what it's like to be in a police interrogation room, and helping others who have been wrongly convicted find their voice and share their stories, and to offer a new perspective on cases where people have been very, very harshly judged, whether they're a victim or a perpetrator. Those are things that I feel like I have a unique perspective and skill for, that I'm really grateful to bring to the table.
Amazing.
Well, we want to make sure that we have time for our speed round, and then Lou Burns is going to come in with his final question. But in the meantime, Amy, let's do like a little bit of an extended speed round.
Okay.
And here we go. We'll just ask you quick questions and you can give us quick answers. Well, actually, you know what? Before we do this, and I'll ask Stacey to fix this in post, I have one question for you, which is,
Sure.
Do you listen to true crime podcasts?
So I listen to true crime podcasts in part, like almost as like homework, because I don't listen to them for enjoyment purposes. I listen to them because I want to understand how crime is being talked about and whether or not we are learning from our past mistakes in the way that we talk about crime. And so especially when a true crime podcast becomes really popular, or like a true crime documentary becomes really popular, I pay attention, because I'm trying to gauge the temperature of if people even realize what it is they're consuming and why they are consuming it. A great example of this is like Tiger King. Tiger King was huge, tremendously successful. Everyone had watched it. It was so freaking entertaining. It was also in a lot of ways really unethical, because it indulged in flagrant speculation about Carol Baskin's involvement in her husband's murder on not really any evidence whatsoever. And, it may be the case that was something that was worth looking into, but the way that people responded to that documentary, acting like they knew for sure that Carol Baskin had murdered her husband, and people were doing dances on TikTok talking about how Carol Baskin murdered her husband, and people were holding up signs out in the world being like, Carol Baskin killed her husband. Like, that gave me pause, how there was almost like a glee in the speculation and the false sense of authority that we all could take away from a documentary saying, like, this is who this person is and this is this horrible crime that she committed, and now I feel entitled to broadcast that to the world. Like, that really troubled me. So
if you didn't have the infamy that follows you, and you didn't have, you know, Amanda Knox, which means so many things to so many people at this point, what career would you pursue if you had the world as your oyster?
I mean, it's an interesting question because I don't often speculate about if my life were different than it already is. But what I do know is that way back when I went to study abroad in Perugia, what I really wanted to do was to be an interpreter and to be a translator. And so, you know, knowing myself, I feel like my ideal situation would be, I would be reading Italian novels and translating them into English, and I would, you know, like, I would be traveling a lot to do so, and that would be that was my ideal life before everything happened. I since feel like I'm translating in a different way. I'm translating experience, and like knowledge differentials between groups of people. Because again, I really do feel like I lived in this really safe bubble growing up where I felt like the criminal justice system didn't really have anything to do with me, and I never had to think about it. And today I realize that is the opposite of the truth, and that all of us should be concerned about what's happening in the criminal justice system, not just because we could be inadvertently wrapped up in it, but because we are all implicated in how it treats real human beings and what it means for our society. It really matters. We all have a say, and we all have a responsibility to pay attention to it.
All right, Sam, I think we have to do the speed round now.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so these are lighter questions.
Okay.
What are you reading right now?
Right now, I am reading, God, what is the cover of the book? I am reading a book about mindfulness. It's a meditation book.
What are you writing right now?
Right now, besides episodes of my podcast Labyrinths, I'm also working on a book about other people who have had their stories turned into entertainment products without their consent. So I'm looking into stories like that. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the other thing that I'm reading right now that me and my husband just started reading was a Batman comic book, The Dark Knight.
That could be a whole other podcast about
That's a whole other thing.
I think that could be another thing, and then we could also do a whole other podcast on, co-opting your story for a movie without telling you or involving you, which is a whole other thing, right? So, but on a lighter note, what is your nighttime routine? Which is a hard question to ask the mother of a 5-month-old.
Yeah, I was about to say, waking up 3 times? No, my nighttime routine is usually once I put baby down, my husband and I tune out to either some Weird Al music or we watch a show like Community or something like that. We really enjoy humor and comedy because we often are dealing with really serious things in our day-to-day job, and so we like to settle down with humor.
If you had to call one motto your life motto, what would it be?
Ooh, It's a hard one. Because I feel like the trouble with mottos is I don't feel like they always work in every situation. Like, hang in there doesn't always work.
I have a feeling that would not be your motto. having spent the last hour with you.
Yeah, what do you think, Boo? What? Yeah. Do what you can with what you have, when you can, that kind of thing.
Did you just have an assist on that
Embrace
question?
Yes, my husband, who's working the audio engineering, I was like, he knows what I like to say.
I want a husband who's
don't
an
really have
audio
mottos,
engineer.
though.
I think I need that.
That's amazing. I think that was great. I think we should get Lou in here for his question.
All right, Lou. Oh, Lou, we can't hear you.
You're muted
I
still.
can't hear you.
Lou, we can't hear you.
Lou.
His mic is turned off. That's why. There you go.
Oh no, Lou.
Oh no, never
Can't
mind.
hear you. This has never happened with
Never
Lou.
happens
Well,
to
it
Lou. I
happens
think
every
my
time
problems
with
are
Sam.
contagious at this point.
Oh no. Oh no, I don't hear you, Lou. I'm sorry.
Maybe just use your computer mic because we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry about that. I was having so much fun. Oh my God, you guys
Yes.
stopped it.
Yes, yes, we can. Yes.
First off,
Sorry
thank you
about
so
that.
much,
There you
Meredith,
go.
for being on our show. It was so refreshing because I'm gonna be honest, I've never heard of a white woman, American white woman, who was wrongfully convicted of a murder. I don't watch that much TV,
course.
and your face vaguely seems familiar. So I did a little search on you, and found some really messed up stuff that people say about you. So I'm sorry you have to deal with stuff like that. But all I was thinking is finally a different perspective on wrongful convictions. You know, a real life different perspective, because there's movies like Mercy and there's movies like When They See Us, you know, that talk about these things from the black male perspective, you know, and your situation didn't happen in America. It happened in a totally different country. So it shows how we are. It's very much alike as human beings, right? Where we use a circumstance and a situation, and we create the outcome, even though that really didn't happen. We're using our imagination too much, you know. So in the sense of what it was like prior to that, how did you see, or when you experience things like maybe hearing about somebody killing somebody, you know, or I don't know. Did you see When They See Us? It's a Netflix. Okay. So in that sense, you're actually just a few just 1 year older than me. I learned about it through Netflix. So just watching it, I'm like, how could people do that to people? You know. So in the sense of prior to being charged with the murder, how did you feel about when people said, "I'm innocent"?
Yeah. I mean, I never thought about it because I didn't have to, because it never, you know, that's the really troubling thing, is that I don't think that people, what I understood was that when people are accused of crimes, it's because there's a good reason that they were accused of crimes, that we should trust when people are accused. And there are a lot of the only thing that guilty people say is that they're innocent. And it's interesting, I also had not really heard about the Central Park Five because I feel like we were too young when it was actually going on. But I met them, I know them, and when I heard about their story, I was insanely shocked, because once again, one of those really tragic cases of there's absolutely no physical evidence whatsoever. We just want a guilty party, and so we're going to force these kids to implicate themselves, and we're going to tie a neat little judicial bow on top of them and forget about them in the criminal justice system. And this was not something that I ever thought about prior to all of this. And the way that we use, just kind of naturally as human beings, othering. So the way that you look at another human being and you decide that they are not like you, and you can therefore judge them and dehumanize them through the process of accusation and create a character about them that justifies our sort of hatred for them and our desire to punish them. That is something that was shocking for me to experience firsthand, and which has stayed with me forever. And you're right, like, one of the weird things about my case is that a lot of people have heard about it, even though I'm really an outlier when it comes to these cases. Like, I'm a college-educated white girl. You almost never see a college-educated white girl accused of murder. And so that, interestingly, gives me a sort of empathy and for those who have been accused of murder, who happen to be like, that happens to be a real concern for them because it happens to them a lot. And in this case, we're talking about young, disenfranchised men. Like, the vast majority of the people that I have met who have been wrongly convicted have been poor men and men of color. And it's a really interesting family to belong to, because I know that one of the reasons why I'm an effective advocate in some ways is because people look at me and they see their daughter instead of someone who looks different than them. And that's sad. That's a human nature thing. But it does mean that I feel a great sense of responsibility and duty to share that this is happening to real people who are
thank you so
really
much
innocent, and
for that answer.
they deserve
And
to have their
I
freedom
really,
fought
really
for.
appreciate your perspective and your empathy on that, because it is necessary for me as a black man. It's necessary for other black people to not have to say I'm a black person. You know, it's for just to feel like we're a part of and we're just like equal. So for you to have that perspective, I think it's really important for other people to hear this, you know, to know that you lived it. And 4 years in prison, you got another deeper experience, you know, having to like now live in that, you know. So I really truly enjoyed every single moment of this. But I was like in the background laughing and I cried a little bit. I did. I felt it. It was amazing. It was amazing. So thank you so much for everything that you had to go through so I could have this experience. And I'm sure it's going to touch somebody else too.